Well, thank you all for coming. It's always good to be asked, especially by a level of which you all represent, to talk about a product that is widely assumed has always been around and widely misunderstood. And hopefully today I'll be able to show you a little bit about how Holland, America, and Michigan in general took this great combination of resin and glass and put them together to form brand new things, not only furniture, but boats. And as today, we're finding them far up in the sky with windmill production. So it's my pleasure to be here, and thank you. If you have questions along the way, there's no problem with me stopping, unless, of course, the organizers think that's, unorthodox. But I just want to be able to answer the questions that come to mind as we see them, and I can better address them clearly. So we'll get going. If God had wanted boats to be made of plastic, he would have created plastic trees, is a common phrase among those in the vintage and classic wooden boat building clubs, and one that always makes me stop and wonder, where would we be without fiberglass boats and other products made from this wonderful mixture of chemicals and design? We do know that within offices and factories of wooden boat builders, this product had a feeling of fear, of the unknown, and for almost 2 decades. Little did they know that fiberglass reinforced plastic, or FRP, would benefit, increase their profit margins, and allow boat design changes and new boat sales that they so enjoyed year after year at boat shows and in showrooms throughout the country. This technology steadily spread throughout American boat manufacturing plants, including many in Holland, Michigan, placing that town among the leaders in the industry. The combination of fiberglass, created in 1938 for insulating homes and businesses against fire and extreme temperatures, and polyester resins to build a boat, first came about in 1942 with the groundbreaking work of Ray Green of Ohio. Before combining the two products that would make him the father of fiberglass boat making, Green experimented with chicken wire, paper, cotton, cloth, and eventually pliable and strong Owens Corning produced fiberglass. Before Green, mostly plastic resin innovators associated with the chemistry went into plastic boat making. Unfortunately, their boats lacked the necessary structural design features that make a boat float and go smoothly through the water. What resulted were many small boats made entirely of plastic resin, with very little reinforcement that a boat would need to succeed in its purpose. They were simply too brittle to be of any long-term use, as the early water test proved with the Owens Corning made fiberglass canoe. While their canoe failed, they were successful with the 1946 groundbreaking stout designed Scarab automobile, the first car with a fiberglass reinforced plastic body. Yes, even before the Corvette. It was only a matter of time before others discovered that the two materials together would change the boat building industry forever. Between the end of World War II and the end of the Korean War in 1953, men like Ray Green continued to improve the fiberglass boat, even with shortages of fiberglass and polyester resin due to military uses. By the end of the Korean War, Americans were making more money, had more leisure time than ever. With more money and time at their disposal, Americans flocked to the lakeshore with their families and a boat. But for many, the dream of owning a boat was still not possible financially. At this time in history, the marine industry did try and succeed to a small degree in offering the American consumer cheaper alternatives to the traditional mahogany planked runabout or cruiser by using sheet plywood and molded plywood to build boats. Unfortunately, even these tested construction materials dating back to the early 1940s were expensive and had limits in design and strength that still needed yearly maintenance to keep them looking good. Some even tried to cover their older boats in fiberglass resin to make it last longer and waterproof. Unfortunately, old wood and FRP do not mix, and many times resulted in a poor-looking job, and even worse, an unseaworthy boat. The demand for affordable, stylish, durable, and maintenance-free boats that would attract new owners from the lower middle class increased so much that early fiberglass boat manufacturers like Green took their cue and capitalized on consumer demand. Early industry pioneer Green and companies like Winter, I'll let you look at Winter's photo here, began making large strides in the boating industry in the mid-1950s. Soon their advertisements started appearing in boating periodicals like Motor Boating, industry trade magazines like The Boating Industry, touting the benefits of FRP technology until it became more accepted by the American consumer. These plastic boats were light, tight, durable, rot-proof, and emphasizing the trend towards new mediums of construction, minimizing maintenance problems. Even at this time, the term plastic in the boating industry was viewed as cheaply made and not durable to consumers. Soon, boat manufacturers dropped the word plastic for the more durable sounding fiberglass reinforced plastic, or simply fiberglass. By the end of the Eisenhower presidency in 1961, the term glass had taken hold in the nomenclature. Consumers were attracted by the term and the chance to own a boat made from this space-age material and carefree construction, and the large and small traditional boat manufacturers in Michigan had begun to realize what they were up against. The history of boat building fiberglass boats in Holland began in 1952, more than 100 years after the beginning of the community's boat building industry. Like many communities in America following World War II, this small city began experimenting with fiberglass in the construction of many objects, many useful, few modern, and even less graceful. From this new boat building method sprang an industry that provided consumers with safe, low maintenance, affordable pleasure on the water, and hundreds of jobs for local craftsmen. That year, Clyde Paul graduated from Holland High School and was urged by his father to use his aptitude for engineering to experiment with fiberglass boat building. Later that year, Clyde and his father started Paul Manufacturing to build the Wondercraft line of boats. While a small firm, they were like a lot of fledgling fiberglass boat builders of the time, working out of a garage, chicken coop, small rented building, or even backyard. By 1955, Paul had been in the business for 3 years and was holding his own in the business, even as more and more fiberglass boat companies were being created. In 1955, fellow Holland boat builder of Slickcraft brand wood boats, Leon Slickers, contracted with Paul to build 50 fiberglass hulls for his company, which Slickers then added mahogany plywood decks and seats. These boats were started in August 1955 for the 1956 model year, much like automobile manufacturers did and still do today. Paul supplied hulls to Slickers for 1 year before the latter created his own fiberglass department to better control the quality and quantity needed for his growing business. Paul continued making Wondercraft brand boats and selling them to other boat builders until 1960, when he finally grew tired of the smell and the mess of working with polyester resin and itch of fiberglass that is inherent when working in this industry, and closed his company. Slickers, however, was just getting started with this new technology in 1956. Even while building molded plywood boats for consumers, he was experimenting and training his workers to perfect the skills needed to launch Slickcraft Boat Company made fiberglass boats in 1957 for the 1958 model year. Slickers continued to offer fiberglass boats with wood decks, as well as boats made entirely from fiberglass and traditional molded boats until 1959. In 1960, he only offered fiberglass boats. In 1961, he offered one model with a mahogany plywood deck and seats, but never again. This is Leon and his wife Dolores adorning their own brochure. Times were tough. Advertising dollars were tight. From 1962 forward, he used only fiberglass to build his boats, making a huge change in the company's history. This change allowed Slickers and his design team to create more colorful, safer, durable, and less expensive outboard and outboard driven boats for consumers tired of wooden boats and hungry for new designs. Slickers never followed the boat designs inspired by the automobile industry. His designs were clean, classic, and useful to families that wanted to be able to move around their boats, get them wet, and easy to maintain. Soon, he moved into a larger factory, this being his original factory, still in Holland, Michigan, on Washington Avenue, to keep up with the demand for his boats. Slickcraft Boat Company also supplied the first fiberglass boats for Century Boat Company, which they branded as their 17-foot Cheetah model. In 1966, let's leave that up, the company moved into a brand new facility to build more boats for this ever-growing dealer network. The company's reputation for building quality boats that were affordable spurred growth and created an impressive sales record that attracted many larger companies. In 1969, Slickers sold his company to AMF Corporation, which then became the Slickcraft division of AMF, better known for its bowling balls and the alleys. Slickers stayed on for a few years as president of the division until deciding to start another company, S2 Yachts, to build sailboats. After a non-compete clause expired in 1975, he began building fiberglass powerboats under the Tierra brand and followed with large yachts. Today, the company continues as S2 Yachts and still produces Tierra yachts, Pursuit fishing boats, and with youngest son Tom Slickers running the company. This is the schematic of a building that is real. You can go to Holland and see this beautiful factory. Leon used the design of this building in several ways. If you look at the roof line, you see the wave. And if you look along the sides of the building, he's adorned it with portholes that serve as a functional venting system for a very stinky production floor. And you can always see what's being made through the clear windows, which is a great advertising vehicle. During the 1950s, Michigan-based boat manufacturing leaders like Chris Craft Corporation and Century Boat Company took notice of small upstarts using this new construction method, like Slickcraft, but labeled it as a fad and continued using wood to build their own designs as much as the naturally created medium would follow. For a few years, this approach worked for the traditional wood boat builders as the demand for the boat-hungry post-war consumers allowed them to ignore a very real threat. FRP boat building pioneers like Ray Green and industrial designers like Brooke Stevens posed to them. This is one of my favorite photos, and it's of a Brooke Stevens designed Evinrude. Not only did he do the outboard, but he did the boat. Only two exist. In 1955, fiberglass boat construction technology came to the state's largest boat manufacturer. Get this back. With the news that the Chris Craft Corporation, based in Algonac with large plants in Holland and Manistee, was using a large gold fiberglass fin and engine cover on the after deck of its new 18 to 20 foot Cobra models. It is unmistakable that this changed the styling trends for the company as it moved forward to retain its large base of world consumers whose tastes were changing too. It also signaled that the company was ready to add fiberglass components to more of its boats, like cabin tops and fins to its runabout line. This is the much sought after Silver Arrow, which is a wood boat with a fiberglass top that goes right to the water line. And as you'll find out, when you put wood and fiberglass together, especially where water comes to meet, not good. So these are, again, why these are so rare. Many of them don't last. The company sought to expand its footprint in the market in the summer of 1957 when it purchased the Lake & Sea brand of boats from Lake & Sea Boat Corporation, a division of Southern Plastic Corporation based in Boca Raton, Florida. From the pen of the Vice President Wayne Pickle at the time came the following comment. Spiraling sales of practical and stylish outboard motors by many manufacturers has created a brand new market for low-cost outboard boats. Lake & Sea Boats will develop a line of durable fiberglass boats that reflect both the unique and styling made possible by the molded fiberglass construction and low prices resulting from volume production. It might be ironic that this purchase came after the April 15, 1957 cover of Newsweek declared, "The outboard comes of age," that included a photograph of the space-age styling of the Brooks Stevens designed Evinrude Lark runabout, and an article within that described a new outboard motor-driven boating fever in Americans suffered by 10 million. With this purchase came Chris-Craft's first real experiment with producing fiberglass boats for the American consumer. Chris-Craft boat was now being produced and would be one of the highlights for the 1958 model year. Color schemes included Boca Raton, white decks, and a choice of 3 hull colors in sunrise pink, seafoam green, and yellow chartreuse. Chris-Craft also touted the fact that styrofoam and flotation, created by the Michigan-based Dow Chemical Company, came standard on all models as a safety feature in case of mishap. The cost of that boat at your local dealer was only $755. Chris-Craft would sell off the division later that year, citing problems with production adaptation and delamination problems with fiberglass-wrapped fir plywood transoms and plywood floors. Soon the name Leak & Sink became synonymous with this boat model, as it was gladly sold to another Michigan manufacturer in early 1958, with less than 300 boats produced. While the Lake & Sea Boats division lasted only 1 year, it did reflect how much the company needed to learn about working with FRP technology before trying again. 1957, John T. Parsons, president of the Traverse City, Michigan-based Parsons Corporation, was notified by his lawyer that Chris-Craft was looking to sell its interest in the Lake & Sea division. By early 1958, Parsons had purchased the assets of the Lake & Sea Boat division and formed the Lake & Sea Boats Parsons Corporation Special Products Division. Known as the father of the second industrial revolution for his work in numerical control, or NC, Parsons began working at the age of 15 at Parsons Corporation, which was founded by his father in 1928. The company made bombs during World War II, and later nose cones for bombs used by the United States Armed Forces and fuel lines for the booster rockets used in the Saturn V Apollo missions. He is best known for his ability to engineer the making of almost anything, including military-grade helicopter rotor blades, and boats were not a big challenge for him in 1958. A color brochure for 1958 still illustrates that what appears to be the same model outboard motor-driven boat previously manufactured by Chris-Craft. In fact, the brochure's text has been taken almost word for word from the advertisements Chris-Craft used in 1957. The same sunrise pink, seafoam green, and yellow chartreuse hulls with white decks were the only other color choices. It is not surprising that Parsons used previously written information to generate a quick but attractive color brochure in early 1958 that promised a molded, durable, carefree bundle of boating fun. Parsons responded, "We built a few of these boats right after we purchased the company, but we're not happy with the results. So I had my chief engineer, Don Goodland. We worked the molds and sold the redesigned boats through the remainder of the 58 model year." By August 1958, Outboard magazine had caught up to the Parsons Corporation purchase and reported that the company was now producing 8 different models of Lake & Sea model boats, measuring 12 to 19 feet in length and 68 inches wide. Evidently, Parsons wasted no time in having his team of designers, headed up by newly hired industrial designer Bert Carlson, make the necessary changes to the purchased molds so that the hulls would release properly and look good. The only two contributions I made were hiring Don Goodland, style the boats, and insisting that he change the look of the boat from the stern, commented Parsons in a May 2003 interview. When the 1959 model year brochure for the Lake and Sea came out in the fall of '58, it was clear that Parsons' vision his boat line for dramatic and very stylish. The line had been expanded from 8 to 11 different models ranging in length from 12 to 19 feet, with different customizations and seating configurations. Models ranged in price from $295 to $1,040. Model names now included the 12-foot Manistee, 14-foot Au Sable, 14-foot Caribbean, and 15-foot Biscayne, 16-foot Arrowhead, and the 18-foot Saratoga, and the much sought-after 18-foot Grand Traverse. Color choices include Mediterranean blue or coral pink for the Biscayne only, tropical suntan added in for the other models. Changes included a snap-on padded seat cushions, vented factory-installed windshield, as well as standard deck hardware, steering wheel, and controls. Custom models included the custom Lake and Sea logo dash panel, steering wheel, running lights, and jack staff. The transom design of all but two of the 15 Biscayne and the 12 and 14 Manistee fishing utility of the styles offered had also changed to resemble louvers seen on many automobiles at that time. There's a better shot of the louvers. This design makes the Parsons-made boats from 1959 to '60 the most identifiable to this day. Parsons realized, the customers recognized that the styling was terrific, and we didn't have much trouble selling the boats, even though we had to ship them all over the country. I also believe that the Parsons Corporation's successful history with manufacturing fiberglass also aided in reducing the problems that Chris-Craft had with making fiberglass boat hulls, like delamination, establishing high production rates and quality production. Even with Parsons' winning combination of style and quality offerings in 1959 brochure, his company could not make the boat line profitable enough. According to the January 1960 issue of, I want to go back here. There you go. According to the January 1960 issue of Boats and February 1960 issue of The Rudder, the 1960 line of boats was to be concentrated to the 15-foot Biscayne sports utility, lengthened models made up of the 15-foot Caribbean custom runabout, 17-foot Arrowhead custom runabout, and the 19-foot Saratoga custom, with no change in standard equipment. Further evidence of the production stoppage appeared in the 1963 Blue Book Outboard Trade-in Guide, which stated the company did not produce boats in 1961. In early 1960, Parsons sold the boat line to Michigan Fiberglass Plastics of Holland, Michigan, the same company that had served as a subcontractor to produce the Lake and Sea boat starting in 1960. The new company, also listed as Michigan Fiberglass Company, was started by Lawrence Valentine Meyering in 1960. Some of you might know his son, Junior Valentine, popular singer in town. Bring that up the next time you see him, see if he... Originally from Chicago, the former lawyer and banker turned fiberglass manufacturer started working for the Zeeland, Michigan-based Camfield Plastics Corporation in 1942. After including some internal strife with the management in 1959, Meyering left the company to try something new. These are rare photos of Camfield building fiberglass sledding discs that are still in favor today. You can see that the preformed fiberglass matting is ready to go. And then the man adds the bright chemicals for the pressing of these. This was some boat fan, I do this only because some boat manufacturers produce fiberglass boats this way. Same concept, where you were using a press during the lamination period or when it was getting solid. Early FRP needed help, and that was heat. Later on, FRP used what they call a warm air curing process, so you didn't have to use the heat or presses. Not long after leaving Camfield, Meyering contacted former co-worker Henry Court with his desire to start up a new boat company and to ask Court whether he would be interested in becoming his new facility manager. After Court accepted the job, Meyering instructed him to prepare a warehouse for boat building. While Court While Court was preparing the rented building, Meyering saw to the transferring from the Parsons Corporation of the fiberglass molds and equipment used to make the boats as a subcontractor. After the molds arrived, Meyering and Court began the process of building the Parsons line of Lake and Sea Speedboat, even though it was theirs now. But it wasn't long before advisors to John Parsons alerted him to the sloppy working conditions done in Holland and the reason behind large quantities of boats being returned for warranty work. The subcontractor was not able to provide the same quality of boat making as the Parsons staff, when it came to compound curves and proper fiberglass boat construction. According to John Scutton, former building manager of the rented building, many of these bad hulls were simply stacked on a lot near the factory, where they were later hauled away for disposal. Other employees who worked at Michigan Fiberglass Plastics mentioned that many of the boat hulls were ruined when separated from the mold due to bad releasing agents. In 1960, Parsons parted ways with the boat line and subcontractor by selling the boat molds, equipment, and brand to Michigan Fiberglass. In 1961, after about a year of trial and error and bills piling up, Meyering vacated the building and moved his operation to 2 rented buildings in nearby Borculo, where he expanded the company's offerings to include not only the lake and sea speedboats, but also canoes and a small sailboat model called the Super Porpoise. The company remained there until being purchased in 1963, along with its inventory, by Grand Rapids, Michigan businessmen Richard Levy and Maury Kleiman. The production of the Lake and Sea model speedboat apparently ended when Levi and Kleiman took ownership of the inventory. The volatile economy and trend toward conglomerates in the pleasure boating industry during the last 30 years has worked against the development of new boat building companies in Holland. Some of the casualties included Lovecraft Company. 50 of these were sold to the Florida-based Disney franchise and were used in the lagoon. They weren't there the last time I was there, so I'm not sure where they ended up. Makes of human-powered engine-powered paddle boats. Moose Brothers, builders of fiberglass canoes. And Bowens Boat Company, makers of go-fast boats and owned by the Bowens family of Holland. Their teenage sons thought it would be nice to own a boat company, at least until they were 20. So the company only lasted 3 years. The only firms to take on the tough times and succeed included the Power Play Boat Company, which was founded in 1983. Like Slickers and Paul before them, Power Play's owners, Kevin Hurtis and Todd Camps, started by building one boat at a time in a small building until they reached a level of production requiring a factory. Eventually, they became Power Quest boats, were once considered the BMW of the sport boat industry because of their quality workmanship and high-powered boats. The company shut its doors in 2009. The other company was Jeff Cavanaugh's Grandcraft, then owned by Steve Nordheis, succeeded by Dick Sly, and now owned by Jeff Cavanaugh. They were makers of the replica wooden power boats that use epoxy resin soaked mahogany wood to make their boats for the wealthy and famous, like Jennifer Lopez, George Clooney, Joe Dumars, Robert Redford, owner of 2, Tim Allen, and the infamous Kid Rock. Today, FRP and craftsmen still come together to provide a solid economic footing for many Hollanders, like those that continue to build yachts for S2. Let's go back to S2 here. Classic wood boat designs for Grandcraft. For consumers from around the world, this industry provides large yachts for the wealthy, fishing boats for the outdoorsmen, and beautiful wooden boats soaked in epoxy resin that will last a lifetime. Thank you. Now, questions, because I'm sure there are plenty. According to Scott Peters, whose book this fall about the tome that will tell you about all of the boat manufacturers in Michigan for the first time. Scott works at the State Museum. And according to Scott, historically, we have always been the leader in boat building. And as of today, we still do lead, except we're starting to compete with Wisconsin and Florida a little bit as people are, the conglomerates are really putting a lot of boats under one umbrella. Brunswick is huge now. It includes not only a lot of small boat companies, but it's also eliminated a lot. It's competition at its best. Four Winds is still successful. I'm thinking of the Michigan firms. All of them are now in Florida, including Chris Craft, which is a beautiful manufacturer of glass boats. It's funny how they've come now to sell fiberglass, using very little wood on their boats to bring back that historic feel of a Chris Craft. And Century, while it hasn't gone that far, is still building beautiful boats instead of being in Manistee, they're simply in Florida. Yes, sir. Well, historically, the Chris Craft started in Algonac, because that's where the Smith family started their place in Michigan history. The reason why they came to Holland kind of started Holland probably had 10 boat manufacturers when the Dutch showed up in 1847. They started building boats. The boat builders were putting craft in the water. The early freighters of the lakes were made in Holland. When Algonac came to Holland in 1929, the same year, 39, I'm sorry, the same year that Christopher Columbus Smith passed away, they simply chose Holland, and a lot of people did choose Holland after that, and the factories of Grand Rapids for lack of labor unions, low wages, and simply because there were more woodworkers on this side or in these towns that did such great work. When the S2 first started, they started putting the windmill and talking about the Dutch craftsmanship in all of their advertising. So they were appealing to a lot of people that always recognized Holland as a quality boat manufacturer and furniture. And a lot of these guys from 1939 on were in the manufacturing areas of furniture, but you have to understand, 39, a lot of men were still out of work. And this gave them a great opportunity. Yes, sir. The only true connection that's documented is the fact that the men that worked in the factory floor in Grand Rapids or in Holland, because we also had a lot of furniture factories of note. When the Depression came along, a lot of them were put out of work because disposable income was limited, and furniture probably was one of your last necessities. When Chris Smith brought this company to town, hundreds of men, when Chris Craft ended its time in Holland in 1989, there were 700 people working in that factory in any given 24-hour period. Now, yeah, it was fiberglass production at that point, but 50 years they had employed men and women who had been in the furniture industry that had found themselves, again, without labor unions and security, they found themselves out of a job. And it's remarkable that in 1939, Christopher Columbus Smith decided this was a good idea to open a factory, number one, and getting close to the end of the Depression, but he also knew that he could make some boats there and still do okay when a lot of other people were shrinking their boat companies or simply going out of work. If it wasn't for the war, which saved a lot of boat companies at least for 4 more years, Michigan would have lost its Hackercraft, its Garwood companies. A lot of those famous, beautiful wood boat companies never would have even gotten beyond the Depression. It's funny you say that because I look at how Clyde Paul in 1952 worked with fiberglass. He was not wearing a particulate mask. He wasn't wearing a vapor mask. He wasn't wearing goggles, probably not wearing gloves. In fact, the first women that worked in the Chris Craft company on fiberglass were women. There's something about women and fiberglass that to this day lasts. There's a special touch that women workers have when it comes to building fiberglass boat. It might be an issue of patience because you have to be very patient and thorough with your work. Because what you have is a very wet inside of a mold. I wish I could find it quickly. Let's go to just a slide so I can describe it. Oh, there we go. What you have here, gonna get it back. How do I get, there we go. This is what they call the female mold. You build a wooden plug, which is where the designers come in. They build this wooden structure. They then put fiberglass over the top of the wooden structure, pop it off to make what they call the female mold. These molds are then, as you can see from the reddish color, it's a wax base that's put on or a releasing agent. And then they spray it with what you see on the outside of any boat as gel coat, white, blue, red, whatever it might be. And that's about 1/8 of an inch thick. So you have the color. Then they start to do this, where they lay on the fabric or the mat and the roving of fiberglass. That becomes the structural component of a boat. Remember I showed you that photograph of resin without fiberglass reinforcement? All you have is a very brittle, it's like when you cook with sugar and you spread it on a pan and you want to make, you crack it. Same concept with resin. It doesn't have any structural support to keep it from cracking. So this is what gives a boat the strength that allows it to not only go through the water, it lasts, you can hit things with it and it'll either bounce or not go very deep, where wood would have snapped at that point. And at this point, it's rare to see men, especially, and this is at the Power Quest factory, where men were more, I saw more men building Power Quest boats than I did in any other factory where fiberglass was built. If you go to S2, it's largely women in that area, and they have the ability to put that fabric on and then coat it with resin in a liquid form. So then you have a saturated piece of cloth that has bubbles underneath. So the women have to use very small rollers, and in some cases on the bottom, big ones. Every bubble has to be removed. If you don't, eventually your gel coat, the outside surface, will have like a pock or a blister. And that's where men don't do well. They don't have the patience in most cases to make sure every bubble is out, that they don't use too much resin, because again, if you use too much, you've caused more structural problems and the weight is increased. This is a constant battle when you build a fiberglass boat between cost, weight, and structure. And is it going to be enough and is it not? That's why the first fiberglass boats made by Chris Craft in Holland are too heavy. They're way overbuilt, but they last up until this day. They're some of the most sought after boats in the fiberglass collecting arena is large Chris Craft cruisers. Yes, ma'am?
As you can see here, there's still a social canopy.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, back to that. Right. So you go into the factories today. If you were to go into S2 on any given day but Saturday, the women are in there with no vapor mask on. They do have gloves, they do have booties, and they have suits. But there's something about the fact that they find it a nuisance to wear these vapor masks, and they have not proven that there's any sort of health advantage except nausea. But there you sit, there you sit looking at all the proper equipment that S2 has provided for them, yet they still don't wear it, and I'm not sure why. Because when I've worked with this medium, I have nothing but the most care in putting vapor mask and particulate mask. Once you get into an area where this is all done and they have to take off this extra stuff you see on the sides, the grinding room is a terrible place to work. They use angle grinders and everybody looks like an astronaut because there's so many particulates in the air and the noxious smell that these people are really careful with what they're breathing in. But at the first stage, when they're laying on the resin, there doesn't seem to be any concern. I was there in March. None of the women are wearing masks. If there's not something in the particulates, they don't seem to worry about it as much.
There are chemicals being degassed.
Yeah. Well, that's it. I've interviewed a lot of early Chris Craft women that worked in the 60s on the first glass boats. All of them can't even remember anybody even being sick to this day, and they're in their 60s and 70s. The one thing that did scare me, what's that? No, and that's just it. I was kind of going in there with a little bit of a study going on, trying to find something that they could claim was the problem. No lawsuits. I've checked the records, no lawsuits against Chris Craft or any of these companies. The one thing that I heard in an interview that was as scariest is the use of acetate. They use acetone to get the stuff off your fingers. It's very sticky. And the only chemical that does it is acetone. So they would work all night sometimes in bare feet in building these boats. So they wouldn't ruin their shoes. So at the end of the day, they just simply put their feet in the buckets and brushed off the glue and the fibers and then put their shoes back on and went home. That's the part you have to worry about, because if you use acetone, it goes right into your skin and into your bloodstream. That's a cancerous causing problem.
Suggest
Yeah.
you talk to a manicurist.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it's the same health hazards, essentially.
If you think of what it's,
Hair and manicure.
yeah, think of what's on your fingernails when you're removing it, and think of it in a bigger, broader sense and how bad that is. Again, I never work with acetone without a mask because just read that big label on the back of the can. But these women were washing their feet and hands in it nightly and not even.
And to really.
There is. The only time I've ever seen vacuum infused resin pulling was in the S2 plant. Think of a large bag on a hull like this. You put everything in place. You've got all your layers and everything ready to go. They put the vacuum bag on, and within the vacuum bag are hundreds of little lines of resin. And what it does is it literally vacuums out the air and it pulls the resins from the lines with the hopes of infusing the entire hull without touching it with resin in the right amount, in the right timing, in the right heat and everything. Now it does work, but it's very expensive, as you can imagine, to ramp up something that large. But even the S2 plant has gone back to hand layup because it's just cheaper. And the problem with S2 is not enough market. You can't afford to do these resin bag approaches a lot. If you do it a lot, you'll save money. If you don't do it a lot, you're wasting money because you're losing all the tubes and it's like medical waste. You don't ever get to use it again. The Beeline Boat Company was in Walker. If you know where the Meyer headquarters is, right next to it is the Walker Tool and Die. That is the original spot of the Beeline Boat Company. Started by a father and son to build a wild-looking boat. It still has the longest wingspan. I call it, it's not a fin, this is a wing. The wingspan is 8 feet, which is just legal on roads. And when I tow a Beeline, I'm very careful about where the yellow line is because I'm worried somebody's going to hit one of those wings. And I think with less than 50 ever built, it's a rare animal. It's one of the holy grail of fiberglass boats if you find one. And the other boat at the Graham, if you hadn't have a chance, is a Lake and Sea. That is a mint-preserved Lake and Sea that the state of Michigan now owns, that a collector found in a barn, didn't know what to do with it, and certainly didn't want to put it in the water because he was afraid he was going to hurt it. So then he donated it to the state of Michigan, and now, thankfully, we have a Lake and Sea built boat in the State Museum collection that can be taken anywhere, including the Graham. This whole symposium and the Graham exhibit motivated that gift. So I think it's very important that happened for the right reason. So we were really happy. In talking to Leanne Slickers, who I think Leanne is 90 now, his youngest son Tom runs the company, and his oldest son David runs what they call Energex, which is a windmill blade production firm in the same factory. And they also subcontract for Van Dutch out of the Netherlands, and I think Zeelander Yachts out of the Netherlands. So not only are they building S2 yachts in there, they're building wind-powered turbine blades and 2 other subcontracts with Dutch boat companies. So that's solid. It's not as vigorous, obviously, as Tom would like. But then you look at the flip side, you look at the Grand Craft line, which is on its fourth owner now, Jeff Kavanaugh. He's still making them one at a time when they're ordered. So he knows that they cannot produce like they did before, because when Tim Masick lost his company, a $10 million company was lost to the bank because he overproduced and overthought what was going to happen. He soon learned and let's just put it the way it was, 2009 happened and he was caught completely off guard. Jeff Kavanaugh is a very conservative boat builder. He builds them only when the deposits are in the bank, and there's a steady stream every month of payment as these boats are built. Don Goodland and Carlson did come from the automotive industry. That's where the louvers came on the 59 Lake and Sea. I can never find the right car. The Soto. And he obviously was taking from that. But in the Holland area in general, no one was using the automotive styling that you would have thought. Now, the Beeline is an extreme example of using fins, and I think there's a few that would have come close, but obviously not as tall. But fins in the 50s drove boat design because of the car companies. People wanted cars, and in most cases, sometimes they would match them. You go to some of the shows today, you see cars and boats match, colors, fins, and year. The motors, if you notice, they're starting to put fins on the motors in the 50s. The color palettes are extreme. The biggest disappointment with the 60s, I think, in boat building is that we had what I call the appliance colors came in. White and that green and that orange. And people still today said the avocado green cheetah made by Flickcraft and given to Century is a rare animal. I just can't get on board with that. I think the 60s the early 60s is a bad boat building era in my case. And I think a lot of people do drop off the collecting scope at that point because they can't get themselves beyond 59 because there's just nothing there that, as Martha can tell you, it's just not attractive. Anything after 1960 I would buy would probably be an S2 boat or a Slickcraft boat, like their 235, which is a beautiful fishing boat, clean lines, you still see them. The Whaler design, I think the Whaler design appeals to me because I'm a child of the 60s and I appreciate the wide open, let's get this thing wet and use it, and non-sinkable features. There's a story in itself how the Whaler people use design and safety to become very successful. And I've never been able to figure out where Evinrude was spending its money. I know Mercury built a lot of motors for small companies like Sears and Montgomery Ward. Those are really, those are Mercury motors. But the Evinrude line, I've never been able to figure out who they were contracting with. One company that did a lot of under the radar subcontracting was Glassbar. Glastron did another one. In fact, Glastron or Glassbar had a company here in Holland or in Michigan just to fulfill the Midwest demand. They couldn't get them out of Texas fast enough. So they ended up building a factory here and doing the same concept. But yeah, there was a lot of that subcontracting, so.